I assume we are ready to roll. I see cameras pointing, so let's get going. Welcome, everybody, to this session on Japan's path to economic revival, the third largest economy in the world, but one that's in recent years struggled with high debt, relatively low growth, has a relatively newish prime minister, however, who's committed to trying to re-inject some dynamism into the Japanese economy, but at a difficult period, post-pandemic, and it's kind of turning point both in geopolitics and in international economics. We have a fantastic panel to discuss all of the issues that are relevant to this. On my right, we have Minister Nishimura Yasutoshi, the Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan. We have Stephen Pagliuca, co-chair of Bain Capital. Julie Bishop, former Foreign Minister of Australia, now Chancellor of ANU. And Tak Niyanami, the Chief Executive Officer of Suntory Holdings and of the Japan International Business Council. We'll stick mainly to the biggest issues, but as a journalist, I'm always tempted to start with the news, and I opened the FT website this morning, and the Japanese economy is our lead story because there's some kind of turmoil on the bond markets. The yen fell 2% overnight, and I think general sense that there's a pressure on the Japanese policy on the yield curve, and that big changes in monetary policy may be coming with a change in the governor of the Bank of Japan about to happen. So, Minister, I wonder, I know it's all very market sensitive, but do you have any comments on what's happening right now?
Thank you, Rakman-san. I'm very honored to be here, and macroeconomic policy is not my portfolio, so I'm not in charge of the total, but I'm in charge of Japanese economy and industrial policy. So I make some comment, and you said, as you said, it's a kind of sensitive, so I make switching Japanese. So sorry, sorry.
No, I understand. Yeah, let me.
Okay, so the current global economy has different issues and changes in Chinese zero COVID policy, and also the changes in the US economy. And COVID is still with us, and the Russian aggression in Ukraine and climate change, and of course the declining population is a big issue everywhere. And in Japan, our growth in economy is one of the sort of not too high, but still within the higher class of global economic growth. And when we had meeting for economic growth plans in 5 years, we aimed to have 100 trillion yen investment, and we have already exceeded that. I myself and the government aims to make a very speedy decision-making as well as implementation of policies, but at least now, I think the economy has started to gain momentum and become more accelerated in its growth. And of course, monetary policy is going to be normalized in the future, but until when we can see a clear path in the future, I understand that BOJ is going to maintain its current policy.
Follow-up before I go to the other panelists. I mean, Japan has been trying for some time, unusually, to actually raise inflation. Is that still the policy, or are we now in an environment in which you may actually have to think about controlling inflation?
Well, Japan has had 20 years of permanent deflation. And no matter what companies do and try and to make products with higher added value and higher pricing, but of course consumers preferred cheaper products, so therefore the impact was very limited and we have suffered from continued deflation. But now we are seeing a surge in pricing, and so Japan has a curious coexistence of permanent deflationary mindset and a surge in pricing. So various government policies have made inflationary surge at a lower level compared to other countries at 4%. But from now on, when real investment is made and wages increase and economy gets going in order to annul the deflation, then we will be able to, or rather the monetary easing can afford to be stopped in the future. So we are, of course, coming to that phase, nearing that phase.
Tak, if I could move to you for a private sector perspective. Obviously, big changes in the macroeconomic framework in which you're having to operate. How do you factor that into your thinking?
First of all, let me talk about what's really changing in Japan. I think Japan lost animal spirits over the course of the 30-year economic downturn or stagnant economy. And that created, I would say, I put the name, status quo disease. Yeah. And I think because of inflation, because of no dividends toward the peace, no more dividends for Japan. And things has so much changed. So our economic landscape has changed. So now is the right timing for us to take vital actions to revitalize our economy. And we, private sector, should follow this momentum toward the vital actions.
And those vital actions are?
So 3 points, key priorities. One, definitely we have to go for the corporate metabolism, bring more cash toward the investment and create new jobs and create new startups. And from corporate, from financial institutions, and ask the obsolete businesses perhaps go out. Yeah. And that creates a jobless situation, but the government should provide maybe benefits like unemployment benefits and the reskilling package. And the second point, definitely mobility of labor. That's an everlasting agenda of Japan. But because of metabolism, that creates a mobility of labor. And the third, I think a substantial increase of household wage hike. That is so important.
Are you seeing companies beginning to do that? Uniqlo didn't it?
Yes, and Suntory too. Yeah. So that means there's a huge momentum shared among big corporations toward the substantial wage hike. Yeah. So that is a great timing for us toward the perhaps toward the exit. Okay. But we need a roadmap, as the minister mentioned. We need a definitely preparation package, increasing jobs, mobility of labor, reskilling, together with the exit plan. So we need a definite roadmap, which is not existing now.
Right. Well, we'll come back to the roadmap in a second. But Julie, I mean, you were Foreign Minister of Australia. I guess Japan's probably the closest partner Australia has in the Asia-Pacific, or the Indo-Pacific, as we now call it. As a sort of friendly outsider, what do you make of this economic debate?
Yes, Australia and Japan are long-standing trusted partners in the Indo-Pacific. Our first economic agreement was back in 1957. We have a free trade agreement. We're both dynamic democracies in that region. Interestingly, your topic, if you like, suggests a tension between revitalising Japan's domestic economy and its leadership role in the region, whereas I see it as utterly complementary. Japanese policymakers know that they have to build a more dynamic economy. I'm not going to lecture them, although I do observe that Australia was last in recession in 1991, and so we have a bit of street cred in this area. But I think it's so vital for Japan to not only embrace a reform of deregulation, opening incrementally more of its economy to competition. But it's so important for our region because we need an economy the size of Japan's to have the credibility of going through long and difficult reforms so that they can advocate from a platform to other nations in our region that open market economies is the way to go.
Yeah. And how do you see actually the kind of trade framework? Because Australia and Japan, again, work quite closely on saving the TPP,
Yes.
turning it into the CPTPP.
Yes.
On the other hand, people talk about this being a new era of protectionism. Do you think you can still expand regional trade?
I would encourage Japan to continue its leading role in multilateral trade fora. Yes, the World Trade Organization's review in 2020 acknowledged that Japan essentially rescued the TPP with Australia after the Obama administration had to pull out for domestic political concerns. But I would most certainly encourage Japan to continue down that difficult but incremental path of opening more of its economy to competition and that includes subsidies and other protectionist policies in agriculture, in fishing, because an economy the size of Japan's is absolutely vital for our global two-way trading system.
Last point before I turn to Stephen, but just it strikes me that some of the arguments that Japan is currently having are debates Australia has been through and come out, particularly on multiculturalism. I mean, you used to have a white Australia policy, and now it's a highly multicultural society. I know you're wary of giving lessons to other countries, but
especially not to my dear friends in Japan.
Yeah.
But I can say that history has shown that the more diverse our population, the more diverse our workforce participation, the better the outcomes, the better the bottom line. So not only in terms of immigration, which has been a massive boost to the Australian economy since the Second World War, but I also should mention female workforce participation, another significant issue for Japan, other countries as well, but with an ageing population, it's absolutely essential that, well, all nations around the world are not going to reach their potential unless they fully embrace the talents and skills and energy and ideas of their entire population, including the 50% that's female. So both in terms of ethnic diversity and gender diversity, Australia's experience is that it has led to, it's not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. It leads to much better outcomes economically.
Okay, Stephen, I mean, you're an outside investor and one with a lot of interest in Japan. I remember actually the late Shinzo Abe speaking both here in Davos, drumming up interest in Japan, famously turning up at the New York Stock Exchange and saying, buy my Abenomics. So this isn't the first time that Japan has tried to pitch itself to foreigners. But as an outside investor, how do you see the current position of the country?
We see it going in the right direction. Bain Capital has been in Japan for 15 years or so. And it's funny, my parents and family moved to Japan from the United States in 1973, believe it or not, and lived there for 10 years. So I've spent a lot of time in Japan. And we've seen massive changes. Back then we said it's always coming, but it actually is coming. We've done several large transactions. We did a $20 billion transaction to buy Toshiba Memory Corp, which is now called Kyokusha, and we work with the government and now have that as an independent private company that's doing very well. Hitachi Metals is another large transaction. So we've seen in the kind of 40 years I've been doing this, we've seen the most openness to allow foreign investment to come in, and basically we've been able to operate how we operate in all the other countries. So I think very positive signs in Japan. The Prime Minister came to New York. I met with the Prime Minister, and he is also talking about opening the economy and going with a more market economy and returns for investors. And so it's starting to happen.
So what kind of sectors are you particularly interested in? Is it right across the board, or where are Japan's strengths?
Well, Japan is a huge service economy, so there's a lot of great service businesses there. They've got technology, certainly chips. Toshiba Memory is one of the two companies that makes flash drives in the entire world in scale. So precision manufacturing, a wide variety of services. All of the businesses there, can benefit from a more competitive environment, as you were saying. And again, I think after waiting, it's finally starting to happen, and the government, Abe, and the new government is supporting those policies.
Yeah, and of course it's all happening against the backdrop of this rise in US-China tensions. Now, I'm sure you think primarily as a businessman, but this is the context, and America is trying to place some restrictions on technology exports to China. How does that affect Japan? Is that a problem, or is it potentially an opportunity because people look again?
It's more of an opportunity if we look back in terms of global investment trends. In the next 10 years, you'll see the great decoupling. China and access with Russia and other like countries versus the U.S., Australia, Europe, Japan banding together. You're going to see new trading blocks. China will, in terms of strategic goods like chips, medical equipment, you're going to have a policy where China will make for China, and we're going to have a policy where the U.S. and the other countries make for themselves. So you're seeing this realignment. It should be a benefit to Japan as a very safe country and a country that you will not have the supply chain cut off.
Okay, well, that's a very interesting point because, Tak, I mean, how does that sound to you? A great decoupling, because you were making a point to me just there that actually Japan-China trade continues to expand.
That's right. Reality of the trade transaction between Japan and China has been increasing. The reason is we can't decouple, but accept sensitive items. So we are intertwined. So that means we need to trade with China, except some items. So this is, I think, a great thing toward the stabilization of the region. Apart from our increase of the defense budget, that's so important toward the deterrence. Yeah. But economic prosperity in the region is one of the tools toward the stability. So we definitely keep the relation with China, and we will.
Yeah.
And let me talk about some numbers. Japan export to China in 21, 12% increase. China to Japan, 60% increase. Let's take a look at US. US export to China, 21% increase. And China to US export, 17% increase in 21. So we are talking about the decoupling. We are talking about the relationship with China. But in reality, transactions are more than among the three countries, including maybe Australia, including other ASEAN countries. But we have to exclude definitely sensitive items like semiconductors.
Yeah, I think it'll be strategic decoupling is what I call it.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Exactly.
That has significant implications in the region, though, of course. You're absolutely right. Australia has a massive trade surplus with China. They're our largest two-way trading partner.
Despite the sanctions?
Despite the tensions in the relationship between Australia and China, which are lessening at present. But in the technology sector, Australia, like the US, have put in place bans on specific areas of technology. But what this means is that China then builds its own internet AI capability, its own rules and benchmarks and standards. And so nations in our region are saying, well, if those competing technology standards are incompatible, where do we stand? And this is the feedback I'm getting from countries in the Asia Pacific. The US-China tensions really comes to the fore when you're talking about the technology sector.
Sure. Yes. Well, let me turn to the Minister. Yeah, please.
First of all, Japan has enjoyed tremendous economic benefits historically thanks to the development of the free, fair, and rule-based trade system. So relations categorized by economic dependency have developed over the years, and there is no turning back the clock on this. So a complete decoupling is not realistic, I believe. At the same time, it's critically important for us to manage the associated risks through our experience with COVID-19 pandemic and aggression against Ukraine. We now feel very accurate with the risk of relying excessively upon the specific countries. So from the viewpoint of this economic security as well, it's vital for us to adequately control these risks by implementing the export controls in partnership with the like-minded countries and building up resilience in supply chains with the advanced technology fields. And one more thing, I believe I consider now more than ever to be the time to hammer out a new industrial policy that can be called the Industrial Policy 4.0. a policy that will bring about economic security, not through unilateralism nor through protectionism, but instead through partnership with like-minded countries. For example, semiconductors form the foundation for the industry and fundamental technology for our humankind future. However, enormous amount of investment are required. And this is something that needs to be undertaken not by any single company, not even any single country acting alone. So instead, it should be the outcome of like-minded countries based on trust, acting in cooperation. Yeah. At the same time, it's imperative that we provide support for companies in a format that is consistent with international rules and ensures transparency. So I believe that's a kind of industrial policy 4.0. So
yeah.
Look, I would say that global trade has benefited the whole world, especially emerging markets, taken 2 billion people out of poverty over the last 30 years, exploded. So it's a great thing. But the issue, as we talk about this, is we sat for years and said it's okay for Russia to supply oil to Europe. It's fine. Nothing's going to happen because of the great economic interdependence. And that didn't pan out. And now there's a huge decoupling of energy and a decoupling of the Russian economy from the European economy. So I think we have to be very careful.
So you're saying get ahead of the problem with China?
I think we have to be very careful because we had the same kind of talk that it's okay, it's great, the businesses need energy, bringing the energy together will make the countries closer together. Didn't happen. Was totally wrong, and now we're in a terrible situation. But
decoupling with China is just a much bigger deal than with Russia. I mean, because it's so deeply integrated into the regional economy.
Absolutely, but I think you have to keep your eye on it over a long-term plan, especially for strategic goods, because you can't be in a situation where there's hostilities or war. It's a balancing act.
I'd like to ask the minister about that, though, because
the risk of war with the risk of lessening of trade because of strategic assets.
Yeah, Minister, because the Prime Minister Kishida's just been in Washington, and I know it's a very close relationship between the US and Japan, but I wondered whether the Japanese and the American governments, maybe after this visit, are, as they say, on the same page on exactly how you want to manage this decoupling, how far it goes, because I picked up some anxiety among American allies, particularly other big technology powers, that these American technology restrictions could be very disruptive for countries like Japan and South Korea. Are you happy with what's going on?
May I speak in Japanese?
Please, yeah.
先ほど言いましたよ。
Well, as I said earlier, complete decoupling isn't not realistic for US economy or for Japanese economy. There is a very deep relationship of dependence between those countries. So that's why I'm saying that management of risks is important. And to that end, the US and G7 countries, other G7 countries, are all sharing the same sort of direction in this matter. So we just had a meeting on 11 strategic materials. So autonomy, as well as indispensability, are what we focus our attention upon. And so some materials that we cannot do without have been identified as essential, and we are making sure that we can source them within Japan or with friends and other friends through building more supply chains in that area.
I think that's a lesson Australia has learned in recent times. We incurred the wrath of the Chinese government, and there was a list of 14 demands that was presented by the Chinese ambassador.
In a hotel, wasn't it?
Yes, yes. I hope somebody's kept that list. Anyway, for history's sake. But the lesson we learned was to diversify and to ensure that Australia continues to build relationships with trusted and reliable partners and be less exposed to perhaps more volatile trading partners. And we have done that over the last few years, although I must say the China trading relationship continues at a very high level. It is our largest trading partner in the commodities that China needs.
Yeah, but I mean, Tak, I guess it's clear from the conversation so far that it's very hard to separate economic revival from national security issues. And Japan has just issued a new national security strategy, big increase in defense spending, and you said no peace dividend now. But more broadly, what's your reaction to this new national security strategy?
Well, to be able to be with the fighting posture toward the deterrence, we have to have the healthy economy. And take a look at our fiscal situation, hugely indebted. And we have to alter and change the way of the course of our fiscal policy. And we need to revitalize the economy so that we'll see more tax revenues. Otherwise, we can't fund lots of the initiatives like R&D, like buying lots of weapons from some other countries. And
Which ones do you have in mind?
U.S., but in case of fighter jet, maybe U.K., Italy, because not relying on U.S. too much.
Yeah.
So
We've got Bushmasters.
and Australia together.
Yeah.
And
I want to turn this into
and
a
the key
sales
thing is we have to definitely shake hands with Korea.
Yeah.
And Korea is so important. And I think President Yoon is so much making effort. And Prime Minister Kishida is working together with Korea. Korea is inside. And it's a great statement that Korea is invited to G7. So I think toward the like-minded countries to stabilization of the region, that's good for picking up our economy. But again, what to do with our fiscal situation to support a lot of investments.
But this has been a problem, for the last 30 years.
That's right.
And a lot of Japanese have said to me over the years, yeah, we've got this frightening debt pile, but, we manage it. It never becomes a crisis. Are you worried that it could eventually really be a big problem?
We have a solution, because private sector holds the extra cash amounting to the $3 trillion.
Yeah.
And that's now staying in Bank of Japan and used to buy lots of corporate, treasury bonds issued by the Ministry of Finance. So we have to change this way. We definitely, let the private sector to invest more. But the government can play a key role, like giving a huge tax incentive to investment for, let's say, 3 years to stimulate our investment. Furthermore, in addition to the comment made by Minister Nishimura, so the economy should be led by private sector. More or less, the economy has been led by the state finance. That's why, we enjoyed so much together with this, peace dividend.
Yeah. Okay, another comment from the Minister, and then I'll ask for questions from the floor. We've got about 15 minutes left. So you've heard lots of suggestions from, and also a demand for a kind of coherent package, fitting it all together. Do you think you're ready to do that?
May I speak in Japanese?
Yes, the new form of capitalism that the Prime Minister Kishida is advocating, and this is our recipe for economic growth. Sustainable growth is what the policy is aiming at. As I mentioned earlier, the private investment is very willing, and the government must do everything to push that and support that. So we have a priming water effect by government making investment first and then lead private sector to invest. But that has been the pattern, but now things are changing. So private sector is taking the lead in making investments. However, wages increase and increase in income is something that the K-Danren has made a major contribution in its recommendations. So 5% and over is the wages increase that the government is asking the private sector to achieve. And there are so many in the audience now from the private sector, so I'm particularly making this request to them as well. And so getting out of deflation and so inflationary spiral or inflationary tendency being taken into mind, we still have to have this extra investment. This is an investment into our brighter future. And you mentioned about Uniqlo doing great in increasing wages drastically. So this is unprecedented, and we really appreciate that. But even this is very small in comparison to what the Western countries are doing. Therefore, 5% and over increase in wages is something that we really need to achieve. And so demand-pulled inflation is what we need to achieve rather than cost-led one. So to achieve that, risk-taking companies are what we are particularly keen to support. And at the same time, efficiency and GX and DX will have to be promoted and implemented. So the government is willing to make major investments in those areas too.
Yeah, I would add in, for example, the U.S. is down 2.5 million in immigration, legal immigration. The point that Ms. Bishop made on immigration is really, really important. The United States was built on an immigrant economy, and we're going to suffer unless we do that. I think Japan, even more so in terms of the population base and opening up immigration. And, you know, back in the Cold War, we used to say trust but verify. I think we have to say trust but be prepared to go on your own in today's world with these strategic assets. So yes, it is a big elephant, but we've got to decouple on strategic assets. And finally, what we talked about is building up the joint defense capabilities to deter any types of wars, because you certainly don't want to have advanced weapons and chips go to China and then use that for an attack on another country, which then will be embroiled in a very massive decoupling. So, you know, I would say abunai for the Japanese, and trust but be prepared.
Okay, so we've got quite a big audience. The lady over here, do you have a microphone? If you can say who you are, that's always helpful.
Thank you very much. My name is Misato Nagakawa. I'm representing Global Shepherds Community Global Network by the World Economic Forum. I'd like to pose a question to Minister Nishimura and Ninami-san. So Japan is hosting G7 summit this year in Hiroshima. It's such a big thing, and it's such a critical moment for Japan to send a message to the global society. What is the single message you would like to send to the global society as a hosting country of G7? Thank you very much.
Good question. I should have asked it.
Yes, thank you. Japan and like-minded countries, which are G7 fellow countries. So rule of law and protecting democracy are what we do the most. And so this, of course, needs to be re-emphasized, and in collaboration with other G7 countries and other like-minded countries, the free and fair trade, as well as will have to be promoted, as well as we have to, though, keep in mind the Global South, which suffers from various issues, including climate change, and we have to still promote a free trade and do that. And the US is APEX countries, they are making a major contributions, and India, of course, is boasting a 6.6 increase in growth, rather, and Indian population is growing fast, and India also has has become a third largest producer of automobiles, and they sold more automobiles last year than in Japan. So India is a major representative of the global south. We aim to increase our ties with India.
The G7 being held in Hiroshima, I know that's Prime Minister Kishida's electorate, and I think the timing is exquisite in that Japan is a leading proponent of nuclear non-proliferation. Given what's happening with Russia, Iran, North Korea, it would be an ideal symbolic as well as practical time for Japan to continue to take that leading role on nuclear non-proliferation, if I could make a suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. Although, of course, the US is modernising its nuclear arsenal.
I get all of that. I get all of that. I'm not suggesting that we try and achieve the impossible, but at this time with the relationship with Iran breaking down, Putin's threats, I don't know what goes on in North Korea. Perhaps somebody can tell me, but we've been talking about it for so long. But just the symbolism of the G7 meeting in Hiroshima under Prime Minister Kishida should not be lost.
Yeah. Tak, you want to add?
Yes, I'd like to echo Minister Nishimura. In addition to that, definitely sustainability. And there are so many headwinds to advance a lot of actions and take actions for sustainability. We have to take, consistent actions together with the G7. But please take a look at the Asian situation, which is very different from Europe and perhaps, and I feel a bit different from the feel shared with the people here, but European-centric is different than that of Asia. So we definitely talk to the G7 leaders as for what to do with the vital steps of the sustainability together. But the rule making should be led by Japanese Prime Minister, knowing the real situation of Asia.
But didn't the Japanese Prime Minister say what happened in Ukraine could happen in Asia?
Yeah, well, but knowing the current situation, definitely the Japanese Prime Minister has to talk about solidarity toward the stability of the world. Together with that, we should not forget, because we are using a lot of fossil energy now, but we should not forget sustainability is a big issue.
More questions? Sorry, it's a kind of circular room, so yeah, chap over there.
Hello, my name is Sakari Terikoski, also from Global Shapers, and to continue on what was just said, sustainability is a big issue. The session's topic is Japan's economic revival, and of course in many countries when economic revival is on the table, people speak about building back better, making sure that we invest in renewable energies and other ways to kind of go on a sustainable track. So continuing actually from the previous point that was just made, from the other speakers as well, and maybe, of course, perhaps those who are the minister, of course, in particular, and others, build back better in Japan. Any comments on the more sustainability aspect of the economic revival? Yeah. How do we achieve sustainability and measure it? Thank you.
Minister, that sounded like one for you.
First of all, from the perspective of energy, of course, renewable energy should be introduced as much as possible. That's our policy, and we utilize nuclear power. Currently, we have 10 reactors on operation, and there are additional 7 reactors who have permission to operate. Then another 10 reactors are under the examination in terms of safety. Once their safety is approved, they will be ready to be used. So a total of 27 reactors have a perspective to be operated. By activating 1 reactor, we can reduce the import of energy by 100 million tons or 1 million tons. LNG import. So of course, next year we will face a difficult situation, but that's regarding a nuclear power plant situation. And also, as Bishop-san said earlier, we should work on diversified economy that's important for sustainability too. Just Inami-san said, and myself too, the Japanese economy has been led by a middle-aged and older men. That's the old style of Japanese economy. That has to be changed, because in order to activate or stimulate innovation, we require diversified ideas. That means we middle-aged men alone cannot create Japanese economies. We have to have young people, and also people or talented people from overseas should come to Japan and work together. As Ninami-san said, we have to think about Japanese labor market too. Japanese workers are very conservative. They just try to stay within the same companies and try to go up the ladder. But we have to change that mentality too.
I mean, you mentioned the conservatism of Japanese society, and I've been to many of these sessions over the years, and people have always been saying, we've got to do a bit more about bringing women into the labour force. We've got to encourage the end of lifetime employment. These debates go on and on and on. So I feel a little sceptical that anything's going to change.
Well, we talk about decoupling, and we cannot never do 100% of decoupling, so we cannot do that perfectly, but I can guarantee you that we are moving towards the right direction step by step. So the new graduate, when they enter a company, 30% of them will leave the company within 3 years. So the new people have a new mindset in terms of women in labor market. More women working in Japan than the case of United States. Of course, the number of regular working tariff is less than US. However, we have solved the issue of M curve, and now we have to tackle the issue of L curve. So maybe not within 5 years, but within 10 years, we have to get a female or women Nobel Prize winner, especially in the area of chemistry or science.
Tak, you wanted to, we're sadly running out of time, but do you want to make a brief comment on that, and then I'll come to our...
We are going through the lots of difficulties because we have to increase interest rates. In that case, we will have the huge pain. But we have to choose which pains, because we avoided pains over 30 years. But we have to choose those pains because we will increase interest rates eventually. That will create a huge impact, positive and negative, both to Japan. That is the right timing to change the country.
Yeah, I think easier for businessmen to talk about huge pain than politicians. You're going to run on a platform of huge pain, Junie?
It's a very career-limiting move for a politician to promote higher interest rates. And Paul Keating, an Australian Prime Minister, famously said, this is the recession we have to have in 1991. And we haven't had one since. So that's how much notice we took of Keating's harsh words. But look, I have great optimism about Japan. I think the comments that the Minister made about diversifying the workforce are so very important, but also the SME sector, the small medium enterprise. Japan does, big, heavy manufacturing companies better than anyone, but it's the SME area where I think there has to be a much more conducive business operating environment for the young, entrepreneurial, innovative Japanese people, and you're going to be part of that global competition for talent as well.
Okay, Stephen, the global competition for talent and generally the global competition, some last thoughts on where Japan's situated?
Well, I'm also very optimistic because we've seen a sea change in the last 10 years. And it was not like that, 10 years ago. So we can freely go in and buy businesses. We actually change management teams. We have mobility. So it's starting to happen more so than in the last 40 years. So I'm optimistic that it will continue. And it's the right way to go, as you say. It's the right way to go to get a more market-oriented economy. And there will be some short-term pain. But if the politicians can step up, it'll be a long-term gain.
Okay. Thank you all very much. I think it's a mark of a good discussion that I feel I could easily go on for another 45 minutes, but somebody else will want the room. So it's been a really stimulating discussion. So thanks to all the panelists and to the audience. And that's it for this year.
Can somebody take a photograph of us?
Sure.
Is there